Hey everybody, I am here with someone who is no stranger to Arkansas, Little Rock, or Pleasant Valley, and is one of my best friends in the world, Brother Randy Harris. Hey, Brother Randy.
How are you? It's good to see you.
So we are doing this on a Wednesday night conversation on a special Tuesday. You may have noticed that this is not Wednesday night. We're doing it this week on a Tuesday because it is election day. And Brother Randy is
Are we having an election?
Yeah, have you heard?
Are we?
Yeah.
Waiting for us.
So Brother Randy has been one of the most influential people in my life on how a Christian theology of politics. And I thought it would be helpful because there's a lot of anxiety. You know, it feels like earlier when people would talk about how divided we were as a country, I would think, yeah, that's really bad. We need to work on that. But then you start reminiscing about like when we were divided as a country really before was the Civil War. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how it feels kind of like something's got to happen. We've got to either start learning how to think, how to have conversations together with people across political ideological lines, or things can't keep going. The center cannot hold, right? So I asked Brother Randy, when I lived in Abilene, Brother Randy and I would get together every other week at Cracker Barrel, and we would talk about everything. And so I asked Brother Randy to join us today and just treat this like it was a Cracker Barrel breakfast. Burned bacon, 2 poached eggs, sourdough toast, right?
There you go.
What did I order?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. And you'd always send the bacon back if it wasn't burnt.
You always have to send it back at least once to get it properly burned.
Yeah, an unsweet tea, and you'd get about 2 refills. We did it for years and years and years.
I've got some unsweet tea here. I'm a little short on burned bacon right now.
Yeah. Yesterday at War Memorial, we all gathered and we had the governor of Arkansas here, Asa Hutchinson, and we blessed him. But I addressed the church body there by saying, if you're anxious about the election, I have 2 words for you. Do you remember what those 2 words are, Brother Randy?
Chester Arthur.
Yeah, I got that totally from Randy Harris, asking him on the 2012 election, hey, what would you say if you were the preacher here? Which is how so many of our conversations went. And you gave me that line. What would you say to somebody who's anxious about their person not winning today?
Well, obviously the point of the Chester Arthur line is, just start to rattle off names of presidents that most people don't know were even president. I mean, you could give them a list and say, pick out the ones that are presidents and which ones aren't. And Chester Arthur actually is the person who became president when Garfield was assassinated. So he wasn't even elected president. He was VP. He was considered an extremely shallow and corrupt man when he became president. Mm-hmm. Everybody was scared to death. Chester Arthur. I mean, he's just he's owned by these big wigs. And he does finish pretty low on most people's ratings, but not at the bottom. And he's moving up. It's just sort of a reminder to people that there've been a lot of moments, not just in the history of the country, in the history of the world, where you think this is the single most important moment ever. Yeah. And we have to get some perspective on that. And that's not to downplay the importance of an election, but one of the fundamental convictions in Christian faith is the kingdoms of earth pass away one by one, but the kingdom of heaven remains, and that world empires and nations have come and gone, and lo and behold, here's the church as the witness to the kingdom of God still there. And we're going to be around a long time after this election if the end of the world doesn't come first.
Have you already voted?
I have.
Who'd you vote for?
It's not really any of your business, is it? So, but people have a right to kind of know what direction I come from. I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat nor a libertarian nor a Marxist, for the few people in your listening audience who actually know what that is. And I have for years either written in somebody, sometimes Jesus, or voted for somebody who usually shows up on TV as other, because I didn't want to go down as somebody who didn't care enough to vote, but I didn't care to vote for any of the major powers. So that would kind of reflect my stance, which is generally described as Anabaptist. And it's very much part of
that's who we are.
Part of our history, for sure. Or some people might describe me as a Lipscomite, David Lipscomb, who wouldn't vote. He out of the Civil War, he kind of had this position that, when politics leads Christian brother to kill Christian brother, then that's bad news. And so what Christians ought to do is just stand apart from the worldly powers. And I get there a different way than he did, but I do mistrust power. And I think it's important that the church, or individual Christians for that matter, don't sell out to any particular
political party
point of view, because we pledge allegiance to something that's higher than that.
And you've been very compelling in your like, that's kind of the way I think about stuff too. As far as who I tend to vote for, my own kind of, my vote is for the church to be a colony of heaven. I think the church is the hope of the world. Although I will tell you, in elections, let me put this on me. During election years, it does feel like there are all these tugs upon my Christian convictions and conscience. Like, don't you care for unborn lives? Don't you care for, Black brothers and sisters? And don't you care for poor? Don't you care for the people who are, for small businesses like your brother owns? Those kind of things. So what would you say to people who have, concerns about very real pressing issues, and the kind of take that we're proposing here on not letting this be too big of a deal to them?
Well, I think that even somebody who sort of comes from the Anabaptist side, like I do, thinks good government is better than bad government.
Yeah.
And bad government is better than no government. The only people who think no government is a good thing are people who've never been in a country that has flirted with that. Yeah. So, nothing wrong with engaging that. I think I am always concerned when churches attempt to win in the legislature or in the courts what they've already lost on the streets. And maybe instead of exerting power, what we ought to do is go back and see if we can win the sanctity of life on the streets, where we can help our young people develop a higher sexual ethic, and where caring for the widow and the orphan and the stranger in the land is not just the responsibility of government, but is something that churches take seriously. And so surely those things that we place value on ought to be expressed some way other than just through kind of the political assertion of power. The other thing I'm concerned about is I always tell people I would prefer to neither be persecuted nor a persecutor.
Mm-hmm.
And I am concerned about doing things with power when I have it that I wouldn't want done to me if I didn't have it. So what we need is some sympathetic imagination where we sort of imagine that if we're the dominant group, imagine if you weren't.
Yeah.
Okay, what would you be willing for the other group to do if you weren't the dominant group? So again, I always want to, and I take local politics more seriously than I take national, international politics. It seems to me it makes more difference, kind of, what happens in your city, in your town. Christians can engage government in all sorts of meaningful ways, but it doesn't necessarily have to be rancorous. And again, I hope we're going to be brothers and sisters after Tuesday.
Yeah.
Surely that's not going to be the, kind of the tipping point that, when you look at the New Testament, it's a tough move from there to us because you're under kind of a Roman Empire. It's a hostile government, and basically what you have is this expression. Okay, so you pray for those leaders. Okay, that's always a good thing. I assume that you prayed for the governor the other day, and that your members pray regularly for religious leaders. And basically what you're hoping for is a government that works well enough so that you can live peaceful and godly lives.
Right.
And the New Testament actually doesn't go much beyond that. Government has its proper sphere where it sort of keeps order, and that allows you to more easily go about the business of being a disciple. And I know people have great disagreements about how hostile our government is to Christianity, but the people who think our government's really hostile to Christianity haven't gotten out much.
Right. Yeah.
Haven't been to some places where it really is
Is
hostile.
that so? You know enough about Pleasant Valley and Arkansas because you're from here and you love this place, and you also have worked in different parts of the country, and so kind of the way that post-Christianity. PV has heard me talk a lot about post-Christianity and how in other parts of the country and now creeping into central Arkansas, there is this sense in which Christianity has it's losing the cultural ground it used to have. Is one of the reasons that we're trying to put too much on politics because like the way you said it, we're trying to legislate arguments that we lost in the streets.
Yeah, I think there is something to that where we're trying to hold on.
Yeah.
And I get that. And there's some things that I'm hoping the government won't do because it'll make all of our lives, more complicated.
Yeah.
But I think that this is my opinion.
Okay.
I think that Christianity has always worked better from the margins than we have from the center of power. That Christianity more likely goes wrong when it allies itself too closely with power than it's with the edges and the margins. And who knows, a book that's been almost irrelevant for Christianity for 500 years, First Peter, may become really relevant now. Because First Peter is about living on the margins. It's about how you live as a follower of Jesus Christ when you're not at the center of power, but you're at the margins. And that would be the worst thing that ever happened to us.
Yeah.
And I can show you lots of places in the world where, and through the history of Christianity, where Christianity has worked wonderfully when they weren't at the center of power. It's just that once you get used to being at the center, it's very hard not to be.
Yeah.
It's scary
Right.
not to be. And
But the gospel, like you said, uh, God's strength is best seen in our weakness. Let's put this in more practical terms. When we talk about being a citizen of heaven, which is political language that Paul is intentionally using in places like Philippians, here's what that looked like historically. We argue today about healthcare. Christians started hospitals. The early Christians started hospitals. We argue about abortion. Christians started saving unwanted children. The first Christians did. We argue about taxes and tax rates and personal property, but the first Christians were known for not claiming personal property and sharing with each other as everybody, as other Christians had need. We were known as putting the government to shame by using and sharing our resources so generously. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
yeah, and to be fair, one of the things, at least in American life, that primarily shifted that was the Great Depression. So the generation that remembers the Great Depression is mostly, dying off the scenes. But when the Great Depression came, everybody was so poor that the government stepped in. And it's not quite a rule, but almost. When the government steps in, it almost never
steps back.
Yeah. And so they took on a lot of the responsibilities that nonprofit organizations and churches had taken. Now, still, if you take everything that churches are doing out of the equation, the place really would fall apart.
Right.
And that's the kind of stuff we can always do, and that nobody disagrees with. I jokingly say Christians rebuilt New Orleans after the hurricane while the government was looking to the keys to the van. Group after group after group after group went down there and cleaned up and rebuilt neighborhoods. And is that political action? Well, I don't know what you
call it,
describe it, but it's kind of the politics of Jesus. It's the sort of good neighbor thing. And for most of the history, for some of the history that you were describing, churches didn't have a lot of social power in the Roman Empire, and so they were sort of doing what they could do. And that kind of activism, I get excited about that. I'm always looking, okay, what's the one little thing I can do to make my city a better place? But I do think, the Hebrews writers, here we don't have a lasting city. We're looking for the city that is to come, is a really important reminder.
Yeah.
The kingdoms of earth pass away one by one. I mean, we're leaning into something else. And you dare not place too much trust in governments, Republican, Democratic, or Libertarian, because they'll always let you down.
That's right. I feel like one of the reasons that this days like today are so anxiety provoking is because America's strength is that we're a democracy, which means everybody gets a say. But it's also our weakness because we feel like we're way more in control than we actually are. And every 4 years, we're reminded of our smallness, and so we turn over families. We get in arguments on social media, just trying to reach past our one vote. And does that ring true to you?
I think that, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? do I want to be an influencer or not?
Yeah.
And if so, what direction do I want to influence for? And Christians are just like every other American citizen. They have the right and the opportunity to go out and make your voice heard. Uh, and now, but I mean that system has produced, I think, more good results than bad results, but it's got plenty of bad results. And I'm always amazed. The country's been remarkably resilient when you look at some of the people who've been president.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder how he made it, how he made it at all. But a lot of that has to do with circumstance. If you look at the ratings of presidents, the ones at the bottom, with a couple of exceptions, are almost all who were wrestling with the problem of the Civil War, either right before or right after. So people like Andrew Johnson and James Buchanan, Franklin Pierce, all those people who always appear near the bottom, found themselves in circumstances that were too big for them. Not to mention that some of them weren't very good people to start out with. And Christians don't have to worry about that because we've already got that right. We know we're in over our head.
Yeah.
And we're placing our trust in something other than the next political savior, because we know they'll always let you down. And, the proclamation that Jesus is Lord was originally a confession that had political implications.
Yeah.
And the confession that Jesus is Lord means that Caesar's not.
I am evangelizing right now. That's a weird way to say it, but I'm having conversations about a person who was a Christian, not about, but with a person who was a Christian, kind of lost their faith, got heavily involved in the political arena, and now is considering being a Jesus follower again, but doesn't want to give up. And interestingly enough, he knows that if he becomes a Christian, he has to re-enter the political sphere differently. And he's on the right. He loves, in his words, owning the libs. He enjoys having conversations that he feels very combative or but he knows if he is to become a Christian that he probably would think many of the same political ideologies he currently thinks, but he knows he would have to engage them differently, and that those would even be subject to Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, it all has to do with what's the noun and what's the adjective, right? Are you a Christian Republican or are you a Republican Christian? Are you a Democratic Christian or are you a Christian Democrat? And Christian's got to be the noun.
Yeah.
Christian's got to be the noun. And you're an American Christian, which means your primary identity is Christian, and American is just one of several modifiers. I happen to be an American, old, single, retired professor Christian. And you can put lots of modifiers on there. But when one of those adjectives becomes the noun, then we're talking about the fundamental sin, idolatry.
That's right.
Do
you think?
Go ahead.
You go ahead, Brother Randy.
No, there was nothing else.
I was kind of hinting around about that because I think if you want to know your idols, you can often chase your anxieties, and it feels like maybe even on days like today. And I am anxious about this election, so I'm realizing I have in some ways given too much to Caesar. That my own idolatries are being exposed in this season. So I was just thinking about how the antidote for that is worship, but worship the one true God who is able to care for the unborn and for the Black lives and the immigrant, and every example I can give to make this as nonpartisan as possible. But God, all those instincts that we have are good and godly, but my vote, or even my entire life's work dedicated towards trying to solve any one of those issues, would not even be a drop in the bucket compared to what God, the God who's worthy of my worship, could do.
Yeah, and I do think it's worthwhile to notice your fears. I think we're largely defined by what we're afraid of, and that ability to kind of take those fears and lay them at the foot of the cross, that's really hard. And we and especially in a political season where both political parties are essentially trying to do the same thing, and that is make you very afraid.
Hmm.
They're both fear driven messages. If you look at them carefully, you'll see how fear driven they are. And we probably don't make our best decisions based on our fears, but our fears go a long ways towards identifying um, who we are. In the political sphere, when I'm wanting to be just sort of irritating, I'll ask somebody, okay, tell me, what are you more afraid of? Are you more afraid of anarchy? Are you more afraid of dictatorship?
Hmm.
That's another way of asking whether you're a Republican or a Democrat,
Huh.
because the answers are absolutely predictable
Huh.
by party. But you should be leery of authoritarianism, and you should be leery of anarchy. So it's pretty easy to play into those fears, and I just figure out which one you're more afraid of, and here we go.
Yes. Oh, this is why we had breakfast so often at the Cracker Barrel. So Charles Colson had he was on President Nixon's staff, cabinet, and who was the guy who Watergate? No, Watergate. Watergate was a scandal. What was the Kissinger would come into the office once a week and would say, "Gentlemen, the decisions that we make today will shape the fate of the free world." And Charles Colson said, and we believed him. We bought in totally, and we gave him everything we had. And then he said, after Watergate and the scandal and the humiliation and going in prison time, and then starting a prison ministry out of that, later he went to Rome and he saw the piles of rocks of the great nation that was Rome, and he thought, once upon a time there were senators meeting saying things like that, and yet they're nothing but a pile of rocks, and the kingdom of God just keeps going.
Yeah.
So on this election day, with people who are passionate, anxious, maybe angry with family members or even spouses or church family, what word of peace and comfort do you have to close us out with, Brother Randy?
Well, let's see how well you know me. If I was going to say, okay, here is the place in the Bible you need to read today, where do you think I would send people?
Huh. Well, I might have thought First Peter before.
It's not a bad place to go for sure, but I probably on today would send them to just go and read the book of Revelation. It'll only take you
Oh, yeah.
3 hours. And Revelation is about living faithfully in the hope that the slaughtered lamb will overcome all the powers of this world.
Hmm.
And even with all of the pyrotechnics of the big bugs and the apocalyptic stuff and all of that, the message rings so clear to these people who are looking out and seeing the Roman Empire that looks like it's going to be there forever.
Yeah.
They're this little battered group, and the Revelation writer is saying, when all of that human stuff is gone, y'all will still be around.
Yeah.
And that's a good word for today. I mean, there's a reason why there are more elevated worship passages in Revelation than any place else in the Bible.
Huh.
It really is a book about worship. And once you get your eye on God and the crucified Savior, the slaughtered Lamb, then all that other stuff starts to come into perspective. And so most people don't sit down and read Revelation all the way through, but it would be a really encouraging word for today. It would be best 3 hours you spend all day.
Thanks, Brother Randy. I will do that myself. I appreciate you, and thanks for pouring into my life and so many other people's lives.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. Blessings on PC, and I hope that the church is going to be a source of comfort and strength and centeredness and calm today and tomorrow and the day after. That's who we're called to be.
That's right. Thanks, Brother Randy.
Take care.